Hey, what's going on, you guys? So, look, after working with over 7,000 students, I've realized that the biggest reason, the number one reason that students have trouble with verbs is because they don't think systematically. So, what does that mean? Systematic thinking is like an organized, right, step by step way of thinking, right? So, the biggest problem that students have with verb questions is they think too randomly. They don't have an organized way to think, right? So I'm here for this short video, I want to teach you guys the system of thinking that I've taught to over 7,000 students. This is the exact same system of thinking that I use whenever I encounter a verb question on the SAT. This makes it so much easier. This increases my chances, and it'll increase your chances of getting these verb questions correct by 1,000%. Okay? So if you have trouble with verb questions, you guys, this video is going to help you out. Now, when we take a look at the answer choices for this question, we know that we're being tested on verbs, right? But here's the thing. We know that the SAT can test us on verbs in 3 different ways, right? So this is where our system of thinking, right, is going to be very helpful, because this system of thinking is going to be an organized ways to deal with the 3 different ways the SAT tests us on verbs. Okay? So, and here, when I tell you guys this system of thinking, right, this organized way of thinking, I want you guys to think about verbs in this order. So the first is, I want you guys to think about subject verb agreement. Okay, so subject verb agreement is basically when you have a singular subject that takes a singular verb. So if I say the boy, then I want to use a singular verb, right? I want to say the boy watches TV, right? If I have a plural subject, then I want to have a plural verb, right? So if I say the girls, then I want to say watch TV, right? Now, the thing that you want to look out for in the answer choices is a difference between a singular and a plural verb. So if you notice, an answer choice that has like the singular form, like watches, and another answer choice that has a plural form, watch, you know that, okay, subject verb agreement is one of the things that the SAT is testing me on for this question. Okay, so that's one. Secondly is going to be verb forms, right? So verb forms is basically like when you have like the ing verb form, right? Like watching, right? Versus another verb form like watched, or another verb form like watches, right? Or another verb form like to watch, right? So when you notice you have different forms of verbs like watching as an answer choice or to watch as an answer choice, right? Then you know that, okay, right, they're probably testing you on verb forms. Now, when the SAT tests you on verb forms, they're really testing you on sentence structure. And because we know that the way that a verb is formed can affect the structure of the sentence, right? So, for example, if I say the girls watching TV, we know that's a sentence structure error. It's not a complete sentence, right? So the way to fix that is I need to say the girls watch TV, right? Now I have an actual verb. Okay, so verb forms, another important. So it's the second sort of thing that you want to be thinking about when you encounter verb questions on the SAT. And the third thing is going to be verb tenses. So a very obvious characteristic of an answer choice that tells you that you're being tested on verb tenses is when you have the future tense, right? So when one of the answer choices has the future tense, like will watch, right? Or oftentimes you might have other verb tenses too, right? Like watches, will watch, has watched, right? So when you have different verb tenses, the SAT might be testing you on verb tenses, okay? But notice how you guys, right? Verb tenses is the third thing that you should be thinking about. Not the first thing, right? But the last thing, the third thing. Okay, now why is that? Well, it's because I think verb tenses is the most difficult thing to figure out, right? It's the hardest or the trickiest thing to figure out, right? And also it takes the longest time, most of the time. Okay. And if the SAT if you're thinking systematically like this, right? You oftentimes don't even have to consider the verb tenses, right? Because you're identifying whether the verb should be singular or plural, for example, right? Is going to be enough to help you to answer the question, right, in a very time efficient, right, and an accurate manner. Okay, so you oftentimes don't need to know. You don't even have to check for the verb form, the verb tenses in a lot of cases, because the other ways that they're testing you on, right? The subject verb agreement and the verb forms, checking those things is going to be enough. Now, of course, in some cases, you will have to check for verb tenses, and I'll teach you guys how to do that. But my point is, the thing that I want to stress for this video is really the system of thinking, right? Like you guys need to start thinking about this test in a very systematic or organized way. So when you notice that you're being tested on verbs, think in that order. Okay, do I notice? And the way that you want to think about this is by looking at your answer choices, right? If you notice like differences between singular and plural verbs in your answer choices, then you know that, okay, subject verb agreement. If you notice the ing verb form, like watching, or the to verb form, the infinitive, to watch, then you know, okay, one of the things they might be testing you on is verb forms. And also, if you notice the future tense, right, like will, watch, right, that's oftentimes an indication that you're being tested on verb tenses. Okay, so that system of thinking can really help you guys out, right? So now let's jump into that for this particular question. Okay, now this particular question is a more challenging question, right? Because the what they're testing you on here isn't as obvious. So what the SAT is actually testing you on here is subject verb agreement, but it's not very obvious, right? And I'll kind of explain, I'll show you what I mean when I answer this question, right? So the passage reads, the ancient Greek game of peteia, believed to have been played with small stones or counters on a grid, similar to a modern day board game, was governed by rules that, though not entirely documented, likely involved strategic placement and capture, as players sought to outmaneuver their opponents. Okay, I'll stop reading right there. Okay, so guys, what I notice here is, well, this is first of all, it's a very complex sentence, right? Now, what I notice, because I've trained myself, right, to do this, I notice I'm being tested on subject verb agreement. Okay. Now, the SAT can test you on subject verb agreement in very simple, straightforward ways, where you're going to be tested on the main subject and the main verb, right? So, for example, the main subject of the sentence is the Greek game, and the main verb is was, right? So you have a singular subject, game, that matches the singular verb was, right? The game was governed. That's the most obvious and straightforward way that the SAT will test you on subject verb agreement. Now, one of the ways the SAT test makes it harder for you to figure out what verb or what the subject is, right, that matches this verb should be, is that the SAT is going to place a lot of additional information, like extra information stuff is what I call it, between the subject and the verb, right? So in this case, you notice that, right, the SAT uses these two dashes. So all of this stuff is just kind of interrupting you. It's trying to distract you from what the subject should be. Okay, so just know that that's what the SAT likes to do. Okay, now the more challenging way that the SAT will test you on subject verb agreement is they'll test you on subject verb agreement with secondary subjects and secondary verbs. So a secondary subject and a secondary verb is different from a main subject and a main verb, right? Secondary subjects and secondary verbs are like subjects and verbs that are not part of the main sentence, like the independent clause, but they could be part of dependent clauses, okay? So what I mean by that is this. If I say, the game was governed by rules that, so here I have this that clause, right? This that clause creates a dependent clause. It's the dependent that clause, right? Now, here I know that this that clause, right, that involves strategic placement and capture. I know that's referring to the noun that appears before it, right? So if I ask you this question, you guys, right? What involves strategic placement and capture? What involves strategic placement and capture? So if you read the sentence, if you read the sentence closely, you would all say, oh, it's the rules, right? It's the rules that involves strategic placement and capture, right? That's what this type of dependent clause does, right? This that clause, right, kind of modifies or describes the noun that appears before it, right? So now this is where the verb, this verb here, right, involve or to involve, it has to agree with the subject, right? And the subject of this verb is rules. This is what I mean by a secondary subject, right, and a secondary verb, right? Because the main verb and the main subject of the sentence is game and was, right? That's the main subject and verb. But a secondary subject and a secondary verb is going to be rules and involve, right? So we know that rules is a plural subject, and a plural subject must have a plural verb, right? So we don't want to say the rules involves, we want to say the rules involve, right? So we want to use the plural form. So because of that, I know that answer choices A, B, and C are all going to be incorrect for the exact same reason. It's because these are all singular verbs, right? Thus creating what's called subject-verb disagreement, where a plural subject like rules takes a singular verb, and that's a grammatical error. So the way that we fix this is we can use a plural verb, or in this case, we just use the past tense verb involved. Now, this is why this question's a little bit trickier, because it wasn't that obvious, right? It wasn't that obvious that you were being tested on subject-verb agreement. For other subject-verb agreement questions on the SAT will almost always have like an answer choice that has a plural verb form and another answer choice that has a singular verb form when they're testing you on this concept. But they made this question, or I made this question a little bit trickier. And the SAT does this too for the more challenging subject-verb agreement questions by using like a past tense verb. Because if I say involved, right, that could refer to both singular or plural. I could say he involved, or I could say they involved. I could say the game involved, or I could say the games involved, right? I could say the rule involved or the rules involved, right? So these past tense verbs, right, can be both singular or plural. It just depends on the context, right? And that's what made this question a little bit more challenging, but still very manageable or doable if you think systematically. Okay, so hope you guys found some value from this lesson. Yeah, and make sure that when you encounter verb questions in the future, that you guys think in that order, right? So remember to think subject-verb agreement, verb forms, and then verb tenses last. Okay, hope this helps you guys, and hope this made you guys 1% better. Hopefully this made you guys 1% better and helping you guys inch 1% closer, right, to your SAT goals. Take care, you guys. I'll see you in the next video.